Millionaire pretends to sleep to test the autistic daughter of his black housekeeper. What she did left him in shock. Are you sure you want to let this child into my house? Margaret Sterling's voice cut through the kitchen air like a blade. Look at her. She can't even look anyone in the eyes. Gloria felt her stomach sink. Her daughter Hope, only 8 years old, stood at the back door of the mansion, gently rocking her body while clutching her sketchbook against her chest. It was a stormy Saturday, and schools had closed due to an electrical emergency. Gloria had no money for a babysitter. She had no one. Mrs. Sterling, I promise she won't be any trouble, Gloria pleaded, her voice trembling. Hope is quiet. She just draws. Please, I need this job. Margaret rolled her eyes. If my husband wakes up and sees this girl here, you're out on the street. Are we clear? Gloria nodded quickly, swallowing her humiliation. At 34, she had swallowed enough humiliation to last a lifetime. A widow for 3 years, since her husband died in a construction accident, Gloria worked in 3 different houses to pay rent and Hope's therapies. What Margaret didn't know, what no one in that mansion knew, was that upstairs in the silent library, Richard Sterling was completely awake. Richard was 72 years old with a fortune valued at $800 million. Hotels, tech companies, commercial real estate. He had everything money could buy. But there was something money had never been able to bring back, the ability to trust anyone. His 3 children only showed up when they needed money. His partners smiled to his face and plotted behind his back. Even his employees stole. He had lost count of how many maids he had fired for theft. That's why Richard had developed a test. A cruel game, perhaps, but effective. He pretended to be asleep in the burgundy velvet armchair. His breathing was heavy and rhythmic. Anyone who entered would think he was just an old man napping after lunch. But on the table beside his hand lay an open envelope. Inside it, $5,000 in $100 bills. Visible. Tempting. Forgotten by a senile old man. In 40 years of testing, no one had ever resisted. The library door opened with a soft creak. Hope, listen to Mommy. Gloria's voice was a desperate whisper. You're going to sit on that rug in the corner. Don't get up, don't touch anything, don't make a sound. Mr. Sterling is sleeping. If you wake him up, Mommy loses her job, and we won't have anywhere to sleep tonight. Do you understand? Yes, Mommy. Hope's voice was soft, almost musical. Richard, with his eyes closed, noticed something different about that voice. It wasn't ordinary fear. It was something more pure. I need to go polish the silver in the dining room, Gloria continued hurriedly. I'll be back in 15 minutes. Please, my love. Stay quiet. The door clicked shut. Gloria was gone. Now it was just the billionaire and the girl. Richard waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The grandfather clock in the corner marked each second. The fire crackled in the fireplace. Rain pounded against the windows. The girl didn't move. Richard internally frowned. Children were naturally curious. Poor children, he assumed, were even hungrier for things they couldn't have. But this girl remained in absolute silence. Then he heard it. A soft sound. Paper sliding. The girl was drawing. 5 more minutes passed. Richard's neck was starting to cramp from holding his head in the same position, when he heard the sound he'd been waiting for, small footsteps approaching. Here we go, he thought. The little thief is making her move. The footsteps stopped right beside the armchair. Richard could feel the child's presence. Could almost hear her breathing. She was looking at the money. She had to be. He waited for her hand to grab the bills. But what came next made Richard Sterling question everything he thought he knew about human beings. Hope didn't touch the money. Instead, Richard felt something he didn't expect, a small cold hand gently touching his arm. The touch was soft, almost imperceptible. It lasted only 2 seconds. Then the girl stepped away. Richard fought the urge to open his eyes. What was she doing? Checking if he was dead? Then he heard a sigh. A sad sigh, coming from an 8-year-old child. "You're cold, sir," Hope whispered, so quietly it almost got lost in the sound of the rain. Richard didn't respond. He maintained the pretense of sleep. There was a moment of silence. Then the sound of a zipper being opened. Fabric being removed. And then, something warm and light settled over Richard's legs. The girl had taken off her own coat, a thin, worn jacket, and covered the billionaire as if it were a blanket. Richard felt a lump form in his throat. The coat smelled of cheap soap and rain. It was the poorest thing that had ever touched his body. And it was the most valuable thing anyone had given him in decades. But Hope wasn't finished. Richard heard light footsteps moving away. Then the sound of paper being moved on the table. His heart raced. Now she takes the money, he thought. The coat was just a distraction. But the envelope wasn't taken. It was pushed. Richard risked opening a tiny crack of his left eye and saw. Hope was adjusting the envelope that had been dangling dangerously on the edge of the table, pushing it toward the center so it wouldn't fall. Then she saw something else. On the floor near Richard's foot was a small leather-bound notebook. Hope bent down, picked it up carefully, wiped the cover with her sleeve, and placed it gently on the table next to the envelope. "Safe now," she whispered. The girl returned to her corner on the rug. She sat down, pulled her knees to her chest, and wrapped her arms around herself. She was shivering slightly. She had given her only jacket to the billionaire, and now she was cold. Richard Sterling lay there, his mind completely blank. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't know what to think. He had set a trap for a rat, but he had caught a dove. 15 minutes later, the library door burst open. Gloria rushed in, her face pale with terror. Her eyes swept the room in panic, and then she saw. She saw Hope sitting in the corner, shivering without her coat. She saw her daughter's coat over the billionaire's legs. She saw the envelope of money on the table. The blood drained from Gloria's face. "Hope." Her whisper was sharp as glass. "What did you do? Why is your coat on him? Did you touch that money?" Hope looked up at her mother with those big, honest eyes. "No, Mommy." He was shivering. "I just wanted to keep him warm." "Oh God." Gloria ran to the armchair and began frantically pulling the jacket off Richard's legs, her hands shaking so hard she almost knocked over the lamp. "What is going on here?" The voice cut through the air like thunder. Margaret Sterling stood in the library doorway, arms crossed, her venomous gaze fixed on Gloria and the girl. "I knew it," Margaret hissed, advancing into the room. "I knew I shouldn't have let this freak into my house." Gloria instinctively placed herself in front of Hope. "Mrs. Sterling, please, it was nothing. My daughter just..." "Just what? Touched my husband while he slept? Went through his things." Margaret pointed at the envelope on the table. "How much money was there? Did you check? I bet some is missing." "Nothing is missing." Gloria pleaded. "Hope would never steal. She's a good girl. She's just a retard who doesn't know how to behave." Margaret's words were like a slap. "And you're an incompetent who can't even control her own defective daughter." Hope began rocking her body more intensely, her eyes welling with tears. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the tone. She understood she was being attacked. Gloria felt tears burning her eyes, but she didn't let any fall. "Not in front of this woman." "Please," Gloria whispered. "I need this job. I'll do anything." Margaret smiled. A cold, cruel smile. "Anything? Then kneel and apologize. Apologize for bringing this problem child into my house and putting her dirty hands on my husband." The silence that followed was deafening. Gloria looked at Hope. Looked at Margaret. looked at her own calloused hands. And then, slowly, Gloria began to bend her knees. It was at that exact moment that Richard Sterling opened his eyes. "Get up." Richard's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Decades of commanding empires had taught him that true power doesn't shout, it simply commands. Gloria froze, her knees inches from the floor. Margaret spun toward her husband, her face shifting from surprise to irritation in half a second. "Richard, darling, you're awake." Her voice instantly changed to a sweet tone. This maid brought her problem child and... I heard. Richard slowly rose from the armchair, leaning on the arm of the chair. His eyes weren't on his wife. They were fixed on Hope, who was still trembling in the corner. "I heard every word, Margaret." "Then you understand why she needs to be fired immediately." Margaret crossed her arms. "This child touched you while you were sleeping. It's completely inappropriate." Richard walked to the table where the envelope of money still rested. He picked it up, counted the bills slowly, one by one, while everyone watched in silence. $5,000, Richard murmured. "Exactly what I left here." He turned to Gloria, who was still paralyzed in the middle of the room. "Your daughter didn't steal anything," Richard said. "On the contrary. She saw the envelope was about to fall and put it somewhere safe. She saw my notebook on the floor and placed it on the table." He paused. "And she gave me her coat because she thought I was cold." Richard's eyes finally turned to Margaret. There was something in them his wife had never seen before. Something dangerous. "Do you know how many people I've tested over the last 20 years, Margaret? 37. Maids, drivers, gardeners. Every single one of them took the money. Every one. Even people I considered honest." Richard took a step toward his wife. But an 8-year-old girl, who clearly needs every cent her mother earns, didn't touch a single bill. Instead, she covered me with the only coat she had. Margaret let out a nervous laugh. "So what? That doesn't change the fact that she's—" "Choose your next word very carefully," Richard interrupted, his voice dropping to an icy tone. "Because the word you use to describe this child will determine how this conversation ends." The suffocating silence stretched on. Margaret opened her mouth. Closed it. Her eyes calculated frantically, trying to find a way out. "I was just protecting you, darling." She tried a smile. "You know how much I worry." "Protecting." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "You called this girl a retard. Called her defective. Ordered her mother to kneel like a slave." He shook his head. "That's not protection, Margaret. That's cruelty." "Richard, you're overreacting." "Am I?" Richard reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Do you know what this is?" All the color drained from Margaret's face. "For the last 6 months," Richard continued, "I've been recording conversations in this house. Not because of the employees. Because of you, Margaret. You have no right. I have recordings of you on the phone with your lawyer discussing how to maximize your inheritance when I die. I have recordings of you instructing the former housekeeper to divert money from household expenses directly to your personal account." Richard took another step. "And I have a very interesting recording of you and my oldest son discussing whether it would be possible to have me declared mentally incompetent to take control of the companies." Gloria watched the scene, unable to move. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Margaret backed up until she hit the bookshelf. This is illegal. You can't record without consent." "My house. My rules. My lawyers have already analyzed everything. Recordings made on private property by the owner, especially involving financial conspiracy, are perfectly admissible." Richard put the recorder away. "But don't worry. I'm not going to use these recordings. Not yet." "What do you want?" Margaret's voice was a thread. First, you're going to apologize. Fine, I apologize. Not to me. Richard pointed at Gloria and Hope. To them. And it's going to be on your knees. Margaret's eyes went wide. You can't be serious. 30 seconds ago, you demanded that a working mother kneel to apologize for a crime her daughter didn't commit. Richard crossed his arms. Now it's your turn. Or these recordings go to my lawyers today, and tomorrow you'll be out of this house without a penny. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then slowly Margaret Sterling, who had never lowered herself before anyone in her entire life, bent her knees and knelt on the Persian rug. I'm sorry, she muttered through clenched teeth, without looking at Gloria or Hope. Look them in the eyes, Richard ordered. Margaret raised her head. Her eyes met Gloria's, full of a burning humiliation. Then, reluctantly, they moved to Hope. The girl had stopped rocking. She watched the scene with an expression no one expected. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't satisfaction. It was something closer to sadness. Hope let go of where she was standing and slowly walked over to Margaret. Everyone held their breath. The girl crouched down, getting to eye level with the kneeling woman. And then, in a voice as soft as cotton, she said, "You don't have to be sad. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. My mommy says apologizing is something brave people do." And Hope did something no one in that room would ever forget. She hugged Margaret. It was an awkward hug, the way only children can give. Quick and sincere. Without resentment, without calculation. Just pure compassion from a girl the world called defective. When Hope stepped back, Margaret was crying. Not tears of humiliation. Something had broken inside her. Something that perhaps had needed to break for a long time. Richard watched the scene in silence, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt his own eyes sting. He had set up a test to catch thieves. Instead, he had found a treasure. That same night, Richard called Gloria to his private office. Gloria entered with trembling hands, expecting the worst. But Richard wasn't behind the imposing desk. He was sitting in a simple armchair, holding Hope's worn coat. "How many jobs do you have?" he asked. "3, sir." "And you still can barely pay the bills." Gloria just nodded, embarrassed. "My mother was a housekeeper," Richard said. "No one knows that. I erased that part of my story when I got rich. She worked in 3 houses too. Died at 52 from working so hard to give me a chance." He sighed. "I built an empire, but I forgot where I came from. Your daughter reminded me today." Richard stood up and looked directly into Gloria's eyes. "I want to pay for Hope's education. Specialized school, therapies, university. Everything. And I want you to quit your other jobs. I'm tripling your salary here." The tears Gloria had held back all day finally escaped. "Why?" "Because your daughter gave me her coat thinking I was cold. She had one thing in the world and offered it to a stranger." Richard shook his head. "I have $800 million and I can't remember the last time I gave something without expecting anything in return. Hope is 8 years old and she's already richer than I ever was." 10 years passed. Margaret no longer lived there. She asked for a divorce 6 months later, accepted a modest settlement, and moved to another city. They say she started doing volunteer work. Perhaps Hope's hug had planted a seed. Richard's 3 children tried to contest the changes to his will, claiming their father was senile. They lost every lawsuit. The recordings about declaring him incompetent were used against them. They disappeared after that. Gloria was now the administrator of the Sterling Foundation, dedicated to supporting single mothers and children with special needs. Her hands, once calloused from scrubbing floors, now signed checks that changed lives. And Hope? At 18, she had graduated with honors in arts. Her illustrations had already been exhibited in galleries. Critics called her the artist who sees what others cannot. But the title she was most proud of was another one, granddaughter. She had been calling Richard Grandpa since she was 10. On Richard's 82nd birthday, Hope gave a speech in the library, the same room where it all began. 10 years ago, I came in here scared. My mom told me not to move, not to touch anything. But I saw a man shivering from the cold. And Mom always taught me, when someone is cold, you offer what you have. Hope pulled from her pocket the worn children's coat, the same one from that day. Grandpa Richard kept this for 10 years. He says it's the most valuable gift he ever received. But he's wrong. The most valuable gift was him opening the eyes of his heart. He saw a child the world called different, and chose to see a person. Richard didn't hide his tears. At 82, he had finally learned that crying wasn't weakness. The moral of this story is simple: never underestimate those the world calls different. Hope didn't see labels, didn't see rich or poor. She saw human beings. And it was that pure vision that melted a heart that money had frozen. Richard Sterling had all the gold in the world, but he was poor until a child taught him the true meaning of wealth. It's not what you have. It's what you're willing to give. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true story? Remember, your time to shine may be closer than you think.